Since the end of the Second World War, the history of the United States has been the history of its dominance. Today, that dominance is waning, and the threat posed by the US to the overwhelming majority of the world's population increasing in consequence. The clearest expression of both the US's dominance and its increasing inability to sustain it is this: the dollar. It is the US's most powerful weapon without question. However, this power is coming to an end. Prior to the World Wars, currency operated as a receipt for gold, which could be traded in at any bank. However, the requirements of the war economy in Europe meant that consumer goods had to be imported. As the US was a latecomer to both wars, it traded consumer goods to Europe for gold, and by 1944, it had accumulated 2/3 of the world's reserves and flooded Europe's marketplace with dollar loans. As such, the decision was made at the Bretton Woods Conference of the same year to tie almost every currency in the world to the dollar at a fixed rate, and only the dollar to gold. This enshrined the economic dominance of US imperialism in international monetary policy. Yet, under this system, there was no reserve ratio for how much gold the US had to have relative to dollars. This led the US to continue to print dollars to expand the capital available to it for imperialist exploitation. By the mid-1960s, it no longer held anywhere near enough gold to back up this expansion of the dollar. The French President Charles de Gaulle pointed this out in 1965, triggering a run on the dollar, with countries trading the currency in for gold en masse. Between 1965 and 1971, the US lost over 50% of its gold. This forced the US President Richard Nixon to end the Bretton Woods system and introduce a fiat money system on the 15th of August 1971. This kept the dollar as the world's currency anchor, but removed the need for gold and any fixed exchange rates. Currencies now fluctuate in value according to their nation's relative competitive position on the world market. The role played by the dollar as the world's currency anchor is what gives it its power. As currencies are tied to the dollar, US imperialism can sanction countries unilaterally, essentially removing their access to the world economy. However, this circumstance is becoming increasingly untenable. With the rise of the Russian and Chinese economies and the increasing size of the EU's economy, the US is unable to retain for itself an unquestionably dominant position in the world market. Indeed, moves are already underway to bring an end to the dollar's use as a financial weapon, with Russia, China, and the EU all seeking to reduce their reliance upon the currency. The consequence of this is that the US is increasingly unable to maintain the dollar as the world's currency anchor. Though no currency is yet able to replace it, this signifies the coming end of the US's dominance. If it wishes to maintain its position in the world economy, it will necessarily need to resort to aggression on a scale never seen in human history. Come the hour, come the man.
Full-page ad in major U.S. newspapers last year criticizing U.S. foreign policy. What would you do differently, Donald?
I'd make our allies, forgetting about the enemies you can't talk to so easily, I'd make our allies pay their fair share. We're a debtor nation. Something's going to happen over the next number of years.
This sounds like political presidential talk to me, and I know people have talked to you about whether or not you want to run. Would you ever?
You know, I just probably wouldn't do it, Oprah. I probably wouldn't, but I do get tired of seeing what's happening with this country, and if it got so bad, I would never want to rule it out totally.
Who's your biggest competitor, your biggest foe globally right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. Now, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe. We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. We assembled here today are issuing a new decree to be heard in every city, in every foreign capital, and in every hall of power. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, is commonly understood as a fascist. What is less often understood is his approach to US foreign policy. The objective of Trump's approach to the world is singular: to maintain the dominance of US imperialism. This he intends to achieve by a combination of strategies, which broadly fall into two categories. The first, which can be seen in his actions toward China, is a simple and straightforward campaign of economic aggression and military intimidation. The confusion over his intent arises from the second strategy, which plays upon the tensions between the transatlantic alliance and Russia to wage a campaign of economic intimidation against all those involved. In watching this second strategy unfold, many commentators have said that Trump views the world as a place in which the US has neither friend nor foe. A more accurate expression of his attitude is that the US has no friends, only foes. The rise of the Chinese economy has unfolded with staggering rapidity. In 2003, China's production accounted for 4.2% of world output. In the 13 years between then and 2016, this has more than trebled to 15.1%. In the same year, the nation's banking assets surpassed those of both the Eurozone and the US, standing at $33 trillion compared to $31 trillion and $16 trillion respectively. With China's GDP expected to surpass that of the US by 2033, it is clear to see why US imperialism views its expansion as an economic threat. On the 1st of March 2018, Trump announced his intent to impose a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminium imported into the US. After they raised concerns, the EU, Canada, Mexico, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, and South Korea were temporarily exempted from these tariffs, allowing Trump to focus on China. He followed this up with further tariffs of $15 billion of Chinese goods on the 22nd of March, citing a Chinese law which requires foreign investors to hand over technology and intellectual property rights when they invest in the nation as justification. China has responded in kind, and over the course of 2018, the number of tariffs imposed by the nations has increased steadily. China has stated that in pursuing this course of action, Trump has started the largest trade war in history. The near collision of a US warship with a Chinese vessel in early October is a pertinent reminder of how such economic combat tends to escalate, with Trump clearly intending to use the US military as his bailiffs. Trump's policy on China represents merely a particularly aggressive iteration of prior US administrations' approach to the nation. He is following the lead given in 2011 by Barack Obama's pivot to Asia. However, his attitude to Russia and Europe is definitively new. Strategy here is murky, difficult to understand, and riddled with misdirection. To understand Trump's relationship with either Russia or Europe, it is crucial to grasp both the framework of prior US policy and the reality of the EU's relationship to Russia. The economic isolation and military intimidation of Russia has long appeared as a point of agreement within the US-led imperialist alliance. This first erupted into daylight with the 2014 CIA and EU-backed coup in Kiev, which led to the expulsion of Russia from the G8, now the G7, with its annexation of Crimea. The enhanced forward presence line on Russia's western border and the conflicting objectives of the Western imperialists and Russia in Syria served to further highlight this antagonism. However, if the EU wishes to further consolidate itself as an imperialist bloc capable of competing with the US, it is imperative that its relationship with Russia does not deteriorate any further. Russia is the EU's fourth largest trading partner, following the US, China, and Switzerland. Further, it is the EU's largest gas supplier, and this role is expanding. The importance of this relationship was clearly expressed by the German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel in 2017 when he stated that any further sanctions on Russia were both unacceptable and contrary to Germany's interests. Trump has repeatedly played upon this conflict of interest to advance the position of US imperialism within Europe. This is clearest in considering his interventions at the 2018 G7 and NATO summits.
You know, whether you like it or not, and it may not be politically correct, but we have a world to run. And in the G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in. Well, I have to say, I think it's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia.
Although these interventions may seem to contradict one another, they are two prongs of the same attack. The first intervention, at the G7, was intended to draw ire from the EU over Trump's position on Russia. In this, it succeeded, with the French President Emmanuel Macron stating that we don't mind becoming six. The second intervention, at NATO, was intended to point toward the EU's hypocrisy over Russia, highlighting the economic relationship between the two. Both interventions are intended to force the EU into a corner, exacerbate splits within it, and ultimately to sever its economic relationship with Russia and any competitive gains it derives from this. Trump's evocation of the planned Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany is pertinent in this respect, as it highlights the splits forming within the EU over its relationship to Russia. Poland, Lithuania, and Slovakia all offered their support for Trump's statements in the immediate aftermath of the NATO summit. This speaks to a further element of US imperialism's present strategy toward Europe. Unlike the US, the EU is not a nation, but an alliance. This presents significant political difficulties in its ability to successfully maneuver through a period of competition as the interests of its member states frequently conflict. The US is attempting to exacerbate such splits by the overt and covert consolidation of the far right in Europe. This can be openly seen in the case of Poland, which vehemently opposes any friendly relationship between Russia and the EU at all. Since the election of the far-right Law and Justice Party in 2015, the US has secured for itself a clear ally in Poland, with an agreement that the US military presence there should now be permanent, a commitment from Poland to begin constructing methods for the import of US gas, and a planned referendum on the future of its relationship to the EU. Similar attempts at subversion are underway across the EU, with the US ambassador to Germany stating that he wishes to empower other conservatives on the 5th of June, and Trump's former strategist, Stephen Bannon, openly attempting to consolidate a fascist alliance across Europe. Trump's strategy of using Russia as a lever by which to attack Europe is further complemented by more overtly antagonistic moves. Having initially exempted several of the US's traditional allies from the steel and aluminium tariffs applied to China, Trump announced that these tariffs would apply to Mexico, Canada, and the EU on the 31st of May. As in the case of China, this move was the prelude to a trade war. In a more overt iteration of his strategy around Russia and Europe, Trump launched yet another campaign of aggression against the EU's interests on the 8th of May with his withdrawal from the Iran deal.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
His cited reason that Iran is attempting to produce nuclear warheads is nonsense, with 10 separate checks by the International Atomic Energy Agency confirming that Iran has stopped uranium enrichment since the deal was signed in 2015. His purpose in backing out of the deal is to end EU trade with Iran and to further escalate US imperialism's disastrous campaign to secure dominance in the Middle East.
President Putin and I have been discussing various things. I think it's going very well. We've had some very, very good talks.
Since his election victory in 2016, an enormous section of the US ruling class has attempted to present Trump as a Russian puppet. There is not a grain of truth in this. Irrespective of any election interference, Trump is pursuing the most aggressive campaign to defend the interests of US imperialism that the world has ever seen. Claims to the contrary express only a tactical split within the US bourgeoisie, with the anti-Trump faction favouring the maintenance of the transatlantic alliance, further escalation with Russia, and a slightly softer hand at home. This deliberately misses the essential significance of Trump's presidency. In every element, he is the authentic expression of the US's quest for complete dominance as an imperialist power. As American as apple pie.